Garten of Banban 4 just released a couple weeks ago, and the series is coming closer to a climax. Number 5 is around the corner, and a lot of questions are being answered as the series goes on. But there's still a lot of conjecture to be made, so I collected the entire story so far, summarized into one video for anyone wanting to catch up or just listen to what it's about. A mother, who I'll call the protagonist, arrives at an abandoned kindergarten, looking for her child. Their child attended this kindergarten and has gone missing. The protagonist finds a note from them confirming that they're here, and that they want a girl named Claire to like them, but they have to fight a bird monster to win Claire over. The protagonist hurries after her child deeper into the kindergarten, but realizes it's much more of a facility than a school. It's huge, and to proceed further, they need to go down a large hole into an abyss below. Another note from a child tells how the hole is scary, and the bird monster somehow relates to the hole. They also find a recording tape that details what could have happened that led to their child going missing. It plays a happy day on a playground with laughter and cheer from multiple children. But soon, a large metallic explosion is heard as if something huge crashed, leading to screams of terror, and then the tape cuts afterwards. The only other item of interest here is 2 boarding passes for a flight from Weverly Mason, who is one of the teachers here, and another from an individual called Uthman Adam, who must have also worked here. As the protagonist continues with this floor, they encounter the bird monster the others spoke of. It stalks them around the facility and looks like it has cold, dead eyes. Eventually it bolts towards the protagonist, and they run towards the back of the floor to an elevator. They make it safely away after the chase, and down further into the depths below. This floor seems to be far larger than the last and much darker. The protagonist reaches a building resembling a central office. A loudspeaker plays, and somebody speaks to them. It's the voice of a man who says they know they're here for their child, and they want to offer to help. But they ask for the protagonist's help in return. They comply with each other, and slowly unlock doors around the building, leading to other areas. Another monster similar to the pink bird comes slithering toward the protagonist in a factory room. It's a dark blue spider-like entity, and stays near the ceiling as it hunts. The protagonist runs as quickly as possible out of the factory and back toward where the man in the loudspeaker was. They make it to safety for a moment, but just as they thought they escaped, footsteps follow quickly behind. Before being able to make a move, they're hit over the head hard. Looking back in a daze, it's a red monster, but they've seen them before, on the walls around the facility. It's Banban, the main mascot. He's sentient and conscious. He seems hostile. Banban speaks, revealing that he was the man in the loudspeaker, and that he tricked them into unlocking the surrounding area for him. The protagonist loses consciousness, and wakes up in a hallway with hospital beds around. Something's wrong here. This area should not be associated with a factory, much less a school. Looking around, there are bodies of creatures that look like the other ones they've encountered so far, but they're smaller and almost muscular. They look dead, but that would mean they were alive in the first place. A paper is found that speaks about the bird monster from before. It tells of an experiment that gave birth to it, a case report. The report says that it was created through genetic modification, and that it would act aggressively toward anything outside of a human child. The researcher who wrote the report talked in a way where this wasn't ideal or intended. It ends by saying the case is not ready for presentation. After exiting the surgery wing of the facility, the protagonist sees the bird monster from earlier. It's instantly hostile toward them, and another chase ensues again. But this time, a large white mascot intervenes and tells the protagonist to follow them. The white mascot is able to get them to safety in a classroom. The mascot then begins to play the role of the teacher, and also shows signs of extreme childlike hostility if the protagonist does not play by their rules. The white mascot appears to be female and has pink smeared lipstick. She runs the classroom just like a teacher would, but the lessons are all about violent topics. She eventually hears a sound, letting the protagonist make a break for it. After running for a bit, they also make it past another monster, a snail. Whatever is going on inside this kindergarten, no being or mascot has proven to be safe so far. Each one has a sort of killing intent, with the intent of each being oddly specific to the individual. Another report tells of a substance called givanium. It looks like the substance is the key ingredient in creating these creatures, like a sort of artificial blood. Another note is found from the protagonist's child. They tell their mom they're okay, and that a jellyfish saved Claire and themselves from the bird and the red man. The note is all the credence the protagonist needs to continue further into the complex. After making their way down open halls, they find Banban again behind a glass wall. He apologizes for what happened and explains that he did it for a purpose. He says that, believe it or not, he's trying to save the children trapped here too. Banban sounds almost somber saying this. He continues, saying somebody far stronger than himself resides deep in the abyss, and that being has the children. The last thing he gives is advice on how to get to the next floor, and that he'll meet the protagonist down there. A new monster is coming for them, and they need to make a break for it, quick. It's something larger than the rest and green with veins. The teacher from before tails the protagonist, but gets swept away by the monstrosity. This allows for enough time to make it to the elevator and to the next floor. When they make it down, a loudspeaker blares with Banban's voice. Banban sounds genuinely sorry once again and says that he's going to try to stay away from the protagonist because he doesn't know why, but he has violent instincts and can't trust himself. He's going to try to help out while staying away. The floors below are abandoned. He says they need to find a person who can help them out on this floor. The person he's talking about turns out to be the jellyfish mentioned by the protagonist's child from earlier. The jellyfish is huge and takes up an entire room on the rear end of this floor. The jellyfish awakes and has a very low-toned voice. He tells the protagonist to give up on searching for her child and return to the surface while she still can. The animal seems more calm than the rest of the mascots here. He talks slowly, but matter-of-factly. He then does something to the protagonist's mind and causes them to see an illusion. There's an enormous-faced creature that looks like its eyes and mouth are scratched out black, just sitting in the air looking at them. He says he needs the children for something he's planning. He will use them to get to the surface, and he will get them all there alive, although he can't say the same for any adults. He keeps his plans ominous from there, and warns the protagonist to leave now. The protagonist is rendered unconscious at the end of the illusion. They wake up in a new location, and Banban tells them that the jellyfish's name is Stinger Flynn, and that was one of his tricks. Back in the central main room of the floor that leads down into the abyss, from the darkness comes Stinger Flynn with a message. He's upset that the protagonist won't take his advice, but says that an old friend needs them more than he does. Stinger Flynn puts them to sleep once again, and they wake up at a table in a random room this time. In front of the protagonist is the white mascot from before, the teacher. She says that there's the big green monster outside that's threatening their lives, but she seems carefree about it. She asks the protagonist to help her escape from his watch. However, looking back, it is the green-veined monstrosity that grabbed them at the last floor. It's going to be hard to get away from it, but they're able to make it out of the room after some trials and tribulations, and back on their way. Thankfully, the teacher seems more intent on returning to class and doesn't try to keep the protagonist from advancing. Another case report is found talking about Stinger Flynn. It tells of his calm intellect and that he's in constant immense pain and body growth, and that the genomes provided come from other living beings, notably humans. The note ends with Flynn's high intelligence being too unpredictable to be presentable. Stinger Flynn pops up from the abyss once again, but this time he has Banban in his hand. Flynn is mad at Banban for aiding the protagonist further toward the children. Flynn says he will not turn into what Banban will ominously. Right after he says that, Banban morphs into a demon form of his past self. It looks like he lost his mind as Flynn puts him on the railing near the protagonist. He's transformed into a devil. Horns are shown on Banban's head. The hellish form of Banban doesn't speak. He has a wide grin and runs towards the protagonist. A final chase scene beckons them to the end of a long hallway. Before Banban can catch up with them, the green-veined monster comes out and battles him, allowing enough time for them to run. Flynn tries to intervene on their senseless battling, but the green monster suplexes Flynn's giant body, leading to a power outage. With all three beasts distracted, the protagonist leaves the floor on the next elevator down. On this new floor, the protagonist makes their way to a dark room down a long path. The dark room just has one button with a light over it. Curious, they walk toward it and press the contraption. In an instant, they fall to the ground, and before their eyes close, they watch as they're dragged away into the dark of the barren complex. They wake up at an interrogation table, as a sheriff monster is watching them from a glass pane. He grills the protagonist on why they're down here so deep, and which of the people they've encountered so far. He gets annoyed after he's got his information, and takes the protagonist out of the holding cell. He tells them to follow him to the Queen. The Queen will decide what to do with them, he says. The Queen's name is Queen Bouncelia, a kangaroo mascot. The sheriff informs the Queen that he thinks the protagonist came from the surface. The Queen responds by saying she knows a mother in need when she sees one, as she's one herself. She understands why the protagonist journeyed this far, for her kids. Queen Bouncelia seems kinder than most of the people here. Bouncelia wants to help them repair the elevator to be able to return to the surface for their own safety, and says Sheriff Toadster will aid them to make this happen. Multiple mascots down here have shared an interest in the surface, and see it as a sort of promised land. Another report talks of Sheriff Toadster. He was fused from a toad, a human, and the Givanium extract. It says that Toadster will protect anything that he deems part of the Banban family, and anything outside of it he will violently catch and imprison, leading to him not being safe to put around the kids. The sheriff and the protagonist journey together to collect elevator parts, and the sheriff continues talking to them about life down here on this floor. He says the Queen needs protection because someone down here can bring the entire floor down. There's a jester, and if he makes the Queen laugh, everything will be destroyed. So he tries to stay by the Queen's side as much as possible to prevent that. Directly after that, the jester soon shows himself in an abandoned part of the floor. He looks like a two-faced puppet monster. He comes wailing toward the protagonist, but the sheriff swoops in quickly and scares him off for the time being. Toadster calls him bittergiggle. It doesn't take them long to find the elevator part in the metallic section of this floor. They return to the Queen swiftly after the encounter. The Queen tells the protagonist that an acquaintance of theirs also showed up down here. They're in the infirmary from previous injuries. It turns out to be Banban, but now he's not in his devil form. He sounds sad for what he became and what he did. He wants to continue assisting the protagonist to save the kids. He then reveals his real name to be Uthman and says that he worked here before the crash. A few months before the crash, all the workers of the facility became indifferent towards him as if he were a monster. He saw them as friends before that, he says. The protagonist allows his help, and after getting back to the elevator repair problem for a bit, the Queen informs the protagonist that even more visitors have showed up. This includes Stinger Flynn, who has become a shell of his former self after being injured by the green monster, Jumbo Josh, and Flynn speaks of his irritation toward the protagonist for getting in the way of his plan, though he can't do anything about it now. The other visitors are in holding cells. Multiple of the monsters from before, as well as the teacher, the bird, and Jumbo Josh. There's not much any of them has to say at the moment, although there is more information found on the Queen here. Apparently, her pouch contains a chemical agent, and any being that enters her pouch will have a hard time leaving it, and almost fusing with it entirely. The Givanium must mix inside, so she tries to stay still to keep the energy sealed in. Any sudden movement could make her burst and let whatever is inside the pouch out. Leaving the area, the protagonist goes to retrieve the last part needed, and during the process, Bittergiggle has been tailing them. Bittergiggle lets out a clownish laugh as he struts away, and a door opens to a final encounter. A large dog dinosaur steps out of a gate in front of the protagonist. Bittergiggle set this in motion. The giant dog hunts the protagonist in a now sealed room for a while. It's a full battle between the two as the protagonist tries to outmaneuver it. Eventually, it falls from hitting its head on the walls, and the protagonist makes it back to safety. Bittergiggle talks to the protagonist between a glass window after the scene. He tells of his rage for being denied being able to make people laugh, and he doesn't believe the calamity that's inside the Queen's pouch. He says he just wants his family back, and since the sheriff and the protagonist are finally occupied, he can make that happen. He runs off maliciously toward the Queen Bouncelia. The protagonist reaches the Queen's court, but the jester and the dog dinosaur are already there. Bittergiggle begins his speech, and the Queen tells him not to tell any jokes. During their interaction, a little bird that has been following the protagonist around falls into a bucket of Givanium nearby. The little bird transforms into a massive modified vulture. It flies off, taking the dog dinosaur with it. Bittergiggle continues, regardless of the queen's cries for him to stop. He tells a single corny joke, and as much as she tries to reject it, she can't. It happens. Queen Bouncelia can't contain herself as her pouch opens, and a beam of energy juts out from it. It arcs towards the ceiling, beginning the rumbling. Sheriff Toadster sprints onto the scene, saying they need to leave the floor right now. The people in the holding cells have gone free. Toadster brought Stinger Flynn to the elevator with them, and the three of them descend into the dark below once again. This ends Garten of Banban 4, the newest game in the franchise, and leads into the beginning of 5. Although 5 is theorized to be a prequel, so it may not lead directly in until 6. Thanks for watching all the way through if you did. This series is not straightforward, and a lot of the gameplay is encountering the creatures over and over, so not all of those moments are important to the narrative. One monster that I didn't mention much, that will probably play a larger role later on, is the giant scratchy-faced monster from the illusion in the third game. He's been watching the protagonist as she continues down the hole for a while now. Other than that, this was supposed to be a short summary retelling of the events, so I hope it helped or you enjoyed the journey. There are more story explain videos like this on the channel, so go check them out and like and subscribe. Thanks again, and see you next time.